Hello, welcome back. My name is Ari, and this month I'm doing a Read Your Shelves challenge. Every Tuesday of this month I will put out a reading vlog where I'm reading books from one specific shelf of my physically owned TBR all week. Now, I have 4 weeks to do this, but I have 6 TBR shelves, and while I could combine a couple of them and narrow it down to 4, that's no fun. Instead, I'm going to use a D6 to determine which shelf I am reading for the week. Let's just jump right into it and head over to the die and the shelves. All right, let's figure out which shelf I'm going to be reading from first. Shelf number 2. Which is 1, 2, right here. This shelf contains a series that I've started and not finished right here. So these are all series continuations. And then these are all sci-fi and fantasy that did not come in a book box. So purchased for myself, gifted to me, whatever. They just didn't come in a book box, and they're either sci-fi or fantasy. So let's pick 3 books off of this shelf to start with. I can add more later. I want to start with a series continuation and finish off The Last Star by Rick Yancey, or it's the 5th Wave series. This will finish off this series, and then I'll be done with it, and I can mark it off of my series continuation spreadsheet, which is always fun. So first book right there. The second book, if you watched my TBR, The Sea of Tranquility is on my TBR for this month, so we definitely want that one. And then these are both sci-fi, so let's pick a fantasy. What fantasy do I want to read? It's between The Bone Season and Uprooted. I think Bone Season starts a new series. I don't know that I want to start a new series, so let's go with Uprooted. This is my sister's copy, so she'll be happy to have that back. So those are my first 3. If I finish these before the end of the week, I can always pull more off of this shelf, but we're going to start with these 3 and see where we go. All right, first book down, we have The Last Star by Rick Yancey. This is the final book in the 5th Wave series, which is YA dystopian about the end of the world through alien invasion. And there are like different waves of disasters happening. Wave 1 is the electricity, the power goes out, like electricity, anything that runs on electricity doesn't work anymore. So like a big EMP, I guess. Wave 2 is floods, mostly coastal floods. Wave 3 is a plague. Wave 4, I believe, are like alien assassins, and then Wave 5 is turning humanity against each other. I think I explained that right. Anyway, this is conclusion to the series. So we get the last little bits of humanity fighting against the aliens. A bunch of, stuff happens that I'm not gonna spoil for you, but this has 3, I believe, maybe 4, but mostly 3 point of views in it. If the characters' names weren't at the top of the chapters, there's no way I could tell the difference between each character. They're all written very similarly. They don't have much of a personality. The plot is fine, but not great. It feels very generic, but it's not bad. Like, I didn't have any problem reading this. I didn't hate my experience with this, but it wasn't like, oh my god, I love this. This is the best thing ever. So basically my advice for going to this series, if it sounds like something you would enjoy, then read it. It reads really fast. It's YA. The font's huge. It took me just a couple of hours to read this whole book.
But if it doesn't sound like something you're interested in, you're not gonna miss out on anything by not reading it. So do what's best for you. I'm gonna give this a 3-star. I'm glad I got another series finished, and let's move on to the next book from the shelf. I have finished Uprooted by Naomi Novik. Now this is a standalone fantasy. It's been out for quite a while, and it's also my sister's favorite book, which is why it's on my shelf. This is actually her copy. I have to give it back to her. But this was good, and I am happy to say this is my first 5-star of the year. It is literally June 29th, and this is my first 5-star of the year. And this isn't even a perfect 5-star. This is probably closer to like a 4.5, 4.75 than like a true 5-star, because there were things in this book that I didn't particularly care for. But overall, Naomi Novik's writing is beautiful as always. The story is really good, very interesting. It has a very strong female character who's a little bit unlikable, which is exactly to my taste. The two things that I didn't like is she's a witch, a wizard, whatever, and instead of like all the other witches and wizards in this universe where they take years and decades of learning, she just kind of seems to naturally come by her magic ability, and she's super powerful for absolutely no reason. It's just like she sings a little song in her head and she can wipe out entire armies, which isn't how the magic system in this land world is supposed to work. The other thing is the love interest. He's like over 100 years old and she's 17. Kind of the ick there. He doesn't pursue her, she fully pursues him. I still don't love it, but this isn't like the worst age gap situation I've ever read. I haven't read or seen anything that feels like it's the same story, but it just has the like sense of being like a fairy tale that you know and love. Overall, good. I'm glad. Happy I finally read this. Happy to have a 5-star, even though it's not the perfect 5-star. I'm still happy to have a 5-star this year. And let's move on to the next book. All right, The Sea of Tranquility by Emily St. John Mandel. Going into this book, I was like vaguely aware of the premise of it. I knew that it was a pandemic book, like a book about a pandemic written during the COVID pandemic. And then I was also aware that she's a little bit of a weird writer, like the story might not necessarily make sense, but I love that. That's like one of my favorite kind of stories, are those weird stories that just don't make sense. And I ended up giving this 5 stars. This was great. I will say it has pandemic aspects in it, but I feel this is more of like time travel-y than really a pandemic. This book necessarily isn't about time travel or a pandemic, though both are part of the plot. This is just a story of a man's life that just happens to involve pandemics and time travel. This is my first book by Emily St. John Mandel. This is beautifully written, so I'm very excited to check out Station 11, which is her more popular book. But yeah, I really enjoyed this. I don't want to say too much about it because I feel like you should go into this and read it for yourself. It's not very long, but definitely recommend this to people who like sci-fi and people who like just well-written stories about people's lives. Definitely more of a character-driven narrative than a plot-driven narrative, though the plot is good. Hopefully that makes sense. So I finished the 3 books that I pulled off of the shelf to read this week, but it's Friday. It's like early Friday afternoon. So I think I should be able to get a couple more books in and make this video a little bit longer than it originally was. So for the videos all this month, the goal is a minimum of 3 books, but I can definitely read more than 3 books. So let's head over to the shelf and see if I can pick out 2 more books that I should be able to read this weekend. I've done a little bit of reorganizing here. Wicked Will Rise I got rid of because
I was just thinking about it, and I have zero interest in ever finishing that series. So why read that book? Like, I didn't like the first book that much. I didn't like the premise. Even if I read that, that would be the last book in the series, so why waste my time? I also realized that I had one of the Great Library books on here that I had already read, so I didn't need that anymore. And then these I reorganized. So let's go through this. This is a series, this is a series, and this is a very, very thick book. So I think we're gonna be done with the series portion of the shelf for this week. Like, I don't really want to read any of these. So going over here, all three of these books start new series. And I don't want to start a new series. These two books right here are thick. Like, this is over 600 pages. And this one, even though it looks skinnier, is longer. This is almost 800 pages. So I don't want to read super long books this weekend, which leaves these two. So these are the two that I am going to read. The Regional Office is Under Attack by Manuel Gonzalez and Born by Jeff Vandermeer. Both are really weird. And that's pretty much all I know about it. So let's do these two and see what we get.
Deep in the bowels of New York City, inside a building disguised as a travel agency, you will find the Regional Office, a group of superhero lady assassins. And the Regional Office is under attack. Take Charlie's Angels, combine it with a Minority Report, some generic nondescript superheroes, and the worst sketch comedy you've ever experienced. And this is what you get. A 400-page book on the attack of the Regional Office when it falls. The Regional Office is supposed to be, like I said, the assassin superhero ladies who are fighting for the powers of good, but you don't really get that aspect of it. This is just the actual attack on the Regional Office when it falls. From the perspective of two women, you have Rose, who is one of the attackers, a 17-year-old girl, and then you have Sarah, who is one of the defenders. And then additional to that, you have like chapters that are like the history of the Regional Office, that are supposed to read like a history book, and then you have like an intermission in the middle from like other people's perspective on the attack. I hated this book so much. It starts out from Rose's perspective, and then the chapters kind of switch between like Rose's attack on the Regional Office switched with like her being recruited by the group that attacks. And then you have chapters from Sarah's perspective that's like her defending the Regional Office, and then how she got recruited into working for the Regional Office. It's very fast-paced, very easy to read. I kind of wanted to DNF it right from the start. I didn't like Rose at all as a character. Wanted to DNF it, but was like, okay, I'm going to read at least 50 pages. And then I got into Sarah's chapters, which I actually like Sarah's chapters, and realized that I was like 150 pages in by the time I checked, you know, the page count, and was like, oh, well, I'm already this far in, I might as well keep going. And then hated the rest of it, so I probably should have DNF'd it. This just isn't my type of humor. But I can say that this is extremely fast-paced and action-packed throughout. And like I said, anything from Sarah's perspective, I ended up just being fine with. Like, if this book would have been just like a 200-page book solely from Sarah's perspective, and we cut out all of Rose's chapters, cut out all of the history and the intermissions, I probably would have given this like a 4 or 5 star. But all of that other stuff added in there was like, I didn't like. I struggled through it and probably brought this down to a 2 star. So this was not for me. If you like an action comedy type thing, then you may like this better than I did, but definitely not for me. But it's off my shelf, and I did read the whole thing. So there you go. Born by Jeff Vandermeer. Now this is the second Jeff Vandermeer book I've read, and I kind of feel the same way I felt about that one, where I liked it, but I don't know if I'm a huge fan of Jeff Vandermeer's writing. Before I get into the plot, I kind of want to give some like background where the story itself, like what is happening in the story, the plot line, all of that stuff, very easy to follow. Totally understandable, no problem anywhere there. It's just everything in the background, everything going on around the character is a fever dream. So like trying to describe the plot of this is not going to make much sense because everything about the universe that these characters are in doesn't make any sense. I want to say it's something like post-apocalyptic or dystopian, but like people can't survive in these conditions. Everything around them is poisonous, and like what, the water's not drinkable. Like how are you surviving? Basically this is from the perspective of a woman named Rachel who lives in the ruins of this city that apparently was on the outskirts of a building used for weird scientific bioengineered experimentations, right? The company's fallen, the city's fallen, population's decimated, they kind of live in ruins, and she scavenges for herself and her boyfriend to survive. There is a big bear. It's a giant bear, like bigger than buildings, and it can fly, named Mord. And in Mord's fur, she finds a plant-like creature called Born, except for Born can like change shapes, he becomes sentient, talks, things like that. And that's basically like the story is her relationship with Born and her relationship with surviving in this apocalyptic wasteland. But everything's very weird. Like a giant bear that can fly and toxic waste everywhere. So yeah, like I said, the story itself totally makes sense. Background, very weird. I'm glad I read this. I think I still want to try Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer, but I don't know that anything new that comes out by him I want to pick up. And I'm not sure how I'm going to feel about Annihilation. Probably should have been where I started with him instead of reading all these like periphery books. But here we are. I don't know who I'd really recommend this to. It's not weird in the way that I like weird, but maybe if you like weird things and you don't necessarily tend to agree with my version of weird things, you might like this. I would say if you're gonna pick this up or pick any of his books up, borrow them from the library so you can kind of get a feel for it before you just dive in, because this is very bizarre and it's got to have a very niche audience who's going to enjoy things like this, and you might not be that niche audience. It's Sunday afternoon, like early afternoon. I definitely have enough time to read another book off of the shelf before this video needs to go up. And so I am going to dive back into the series, and I'm going to read whichever one of these books comes next. So I have 2 books left in the Great Library series. This is Young Adult Dystopian. I don't know which book comes next, and they don't have like numbers because usually like the series will be on the back or something like that. So I have to go look up which one. I think it's this one. But whichever one of these comes next, that leaves me with just 1 book, or if I read that, that'll leave me with 1 book left in the series, which means I could probably get it done this year, which will be very good. All right, Smoke and Iron by Rachel Kane. I'm gonna try to make this quick because this is book 4 in a series and not a particularly great series at that. So the Great Library series is an alternate reality dystopian. The Library of Alexandria never fell, and in what we can assume to be somewhat modern times, it is the ultimate power of the world. But as many powers are, it is very corrupt, and the characters, the teenage characters of this series are kind of trying to overthrow that corruption. Now, so far, there's still one book left, and it might change my mind, but so far in the series, I kind of feel the same way about it as I did the Maze Runner series, where the first book in the series is very, very good, but it probably should have never been a series. Everything past the first book, it's been mediocre at best, way too long and drawn out, and I will be happy to finish up the series, but I really, at least so far, don't recommend reading past the first book. And that's everything. I got a huge chunk of books done off of this shelf this week, 6 books when the goal was 3. Many of these books have been on my shelf for years and years and years, so I'm glad to have read them. I don't know if I'm going to be this successful every week, but we can hope. Because if I can read almost a book a day, I'm going to clear this TBR off in no time. Thank you for being here, and I will see you next week with another shelf. Bye.